made it clear that they will not renegotiate the deal itself. But the BBC has seen the draft conclusions of this summit, and they suggest that they will try to offer new assurances about the backstop, as our Brussels correspondent Adam Fleming now reports.
Safe in her job, for now, Theresa May has sped to Brussels to secure tweaks to the Brexit deal. First stop, a meeting with the Irish Prime Minister. The focus is on the backup plan for avoiding a hard border on the island of Ireland, the so-called backstop.
My focus now is on ensuring that I can get those assurances that we need to get this deal over the line, because I genuinely believe it's in the best interests of both sides, the UK and the EU, to get the deal over the line, to agree a deal. But I recognise the strength of concern in the House of Commons, and that's what I will be putting to colleagues today. I don't expect an immediate breakthrough, but what I do hope is that we can start to work as quickly as possible on the assurances that are necessary.
The EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, isn't willing to do any more negotiating. But EU leaders are considering 6 paragraphs of written reassurance. They will say the backstop is temporary and would only be in place for as long as needed, not forever. The EU will pledge to continue negotiating a trade deal with the UK, even if the backstop comes into force. And the UK and the EU will work on more reassurance about the backstop, which could be finalised in January. None of that would be legally binding, but if all the 27 other leaders sign up to it here tonight, it would be politically binding. And there is a promise of stronger stuff to come. Arriving for their traditional pre-summit meetings, EU leaders said they wanted to help, but there were limits.
They need to achieve good solutions. It's impossible on the Brexit for us to change our position.
That was the message in the German Parliament this morning too. It passed a motion calling the idea of a better Brexit deal an illusion.
Unser klares Interesse ist weiter eine Einigung mit Großbritannien.
Our clear interest continues to be an agreement with Great Britain. The agreement negotiated on for many months is truly a fair compromise. It is a good basis for an orderly exit and for the creation of close future ties. There is no basis to unravel this agreement. We've made this clear again in recent days, and nothing will change.
Mrs May has convinced the EU to lend her a hand. But can anything she brings back from Brussels convince angry MPs back at home?
Well, let's talk to Adam Fleming live now. Adam, these 6 paragraphs, they could be very important, but the question is, are they legally binding, and will they be enough?
2 very good questions. First of all, we should say this is a draft of the document that the leaders will look at tonight. Once they get their hands on it and go through it with their own highlighter pens, they may change some of it, so it may be tweaked by the time we get to see it. It is not legally binding at this stage, but it will be politically binding, because the 27 leaders will have walked the red carpet, listened to Mrs May, talked around that table, and then this will be there in black and white, the reassurance that they're prepared to offer the UK to help get the deal through. Anything that is legally binding, I think, will come later, because what the EU is doing tonight is opening the door to another process where their officials will sit down with the British and try and hammer out some more language, maybe another document that we will not see until January. And the Prime Minister admitted on the red carpet when she arrived here in Brussels a few minutes ago, this is not the end of the story, this is just start of the process of getting that reassurance. And the EU's got a bit of a dilemma here. They need to keep the Irish member states happy and make sure that the backstop, their commitment to Ireland, is solid, but at the same time say stuff to Mrs May that helps her with her MPs. But the bottom line is the deal, the text of the withdrawal agreement, the 585-page divorce treaty, that is not going to change. This is all about what can be done around the edges that helps Theresa May when she goes back home to sell the deal for a final time.
All right, Adam, thank you very much indeed. Adam Fleming there. Well, Mrs May is going to be telling the other EU leaders exactly what she needs from them. That's at the first working session of this summit, starting in a couple of hours. And then later, the 27 will discuss Brexit among themselves and without the Prime Minister in the room to see what they might be able to do to help her. But now let's get all the very latest political developments back home, and let's join my colleague Simon McCoy, who's at Westminster.
Ben, thank you very much. Yes, the Prime Minister has confirmed this morning that she won't lead her party into the next election. And it now seems the so-called meaningful vote for MPs on her Brexit deal is unlikely to be held next week, though it will happen before January the 21st. Tensions are still running high within the Conservative Party after last night's vote of confidence, as our political correspondent Ian Watson reports.
The morning after the night before at Westminster, a new dawn for the Prime Minister. The vote of confidence was, if not disastrous, certainly disappointing, with more than a third of her MPs wanting her to go. She confirmed today that she had to promise not to lead her party into another election. Her focus now was on her deal.
What I'm clear about is the next general election is in 2022, and I think it's right that another party leader takes us into that general election. My focus now is on ensuring that I can get those assurances that we need to get this deal over the line.
And the main issue, just in case you don't know by now, is the backstop, staying close to EU rules to avoid a hard border in Ireland. Her critics, even some of her cabinet, believe she needs a legally watertight assurance that it's temporary. This morning, ministers were hopeful of progress.
And I wish her every success today in making sure that she delivers on the questions some of my colleagues have had about the backstop.
We have a period of time now, following the vote last night, for the Prime Minister to have those discussions with European colleagues. And I think we saw in the language that was reported last night that there is some movement.
But this former Conservative leader doesn't think there's been nearly enough. He says the EU needs the smack of firm government.
What's on offer is what she forces the EU to face up to. We don't want to hear any more about the fact that the EU won't, the EU won't, the EU won't. What we want to know is, what does the UK government genuinely think that it's prepared to do? Are you prepared to leave the table? Are you prepared to take the 39 billion off the table? Are you prepared to say to the EU, for God's sake, you are the ones that will not compromise? We have compromised all the way through.
And he warns Theresa May that without significant changes, Northern Ireland's DUP could force her from office.
We may face a vote of confidence in the House. How can we rely on the DUP, all of them, to support us when they are so fundamentally offside on this agreement?
Well, Theresa May has gone to Brussels, but she leaves behind a divided party. Her Chancellor has talked about flushing out extremists. A former leader has said that that kind of talk could be the end of the party as we know it. And a current minister has said, after the apocalypse, all that will be left are ants and Tory MPs complaining about Europe and their leader. The tall order for Theresa May is that she must heal those divisions in little more than a month. MPs will vote on her revised deal on or before the 21st of January. If it's rejected, she has until the 11th of February to That doesn't leave much time for the EU Parliament to give its approval, as we're due to leave the EU by the end of March. Theresa May now needs to build bridges with her own backbenchers, and she'll be reflecting on the fact that it's easier to win a vote of confidence than to win approval for her deal at Westminster. Ian Watson, BBC News.
Well, let's talk to our assistant political editor Norman Smith, who is here with me now. Let's assume, and this is a difficult assumption, that there is no further crisis that the Prime Minister has to deal with. Is Christmas going ahead as normal now, based on the timings we've just heard?
Well, fingers crossed, yes, it looks that way, because the government have indicated that Mrs May's vote on her deal is not now going to happen until the new year. But, you know, one of the paradoxes of last night is actually it may not have changed very much. Mrs May still seems to be facing this insurmountable task of getting her Brexit deal through, and in many ways it's perhaps been made even harder because we now have a solid bloc, and it is a bloc, it's not a sort of tiny rump of 20 or 30 Tory MPs, 117 Tory MPs who appear to be pretty much irreconcilable. They are against Mrs May, and they're probably against whatever deal she brings back. And that is despite Mrs May's promise to them yesterday, look, I will not be your leader at the next election, something she's confirmed in the past half an hour or so. Still, 117 are going to vote against her. So how does she break this deadlock? One idea that has been mooted is that she reaches out to the opposition parties, and she did seem to float that a little bit last night, talking about the need for politicians of all parties to come together. That idea has provoked a furious response. Ian Duncan Smith described it as mad. Another option is she simply seeks to terrify MPs by the threat of no deal, that they eventually wobble, crack and back her deal. Many MPs believe she just wouldn't dare do that. Option 3, you go for a second referendum, but Mrs May has firmly set her face against that. You're then left with option 4, which is the EU offer up meaningful concessions, but they've already pretty much signalled, no, that's not going to happen. So I'm afraid in the new year, we are going to be back on this sort of Brexit roundabout, going round and round and round, with all this sort of exit seemingly blocked off either by 10-foot high walls or cliff edges. So let's hope Christmas is going to be a good one.
No, thank you very much. Now, over the last few days and weeks, Theresa May has been continually urging her Conservative MPs to think of the voters. Well, the port city of Southampton, chaos leads in the referendum. Our voters there fully behind Theresa May. Our correspondent Duncan Kennedy has been finding out.
Southampton, the city that found its sea legs under the Romans. And a place fully prepared to voice its opinions on the Prime Minister. First stop, the Christmas market, where among the Red Leicesters and the Cheshire Blues came some sympathy for Mrs May.
She's got her hands tied in a lot of areas, yes, I would definitely keep going with her. I think she deserves to keep going, and I feel very sorry for her this time, to be honest.
If they change her, it's a mistake, isn't it? Why change somebody just before something's going to happen?
But down at the station, some were less impressed by the Prime Minister's survival skills.
The vote went her way, but we still got the Prime Minister that we had before, and everything's going to be the same. I can't see it being any different.
This is a referendum Leave city, voting 54% to 46%. Many here see the Prime Minister in a high-wire act of political survival.
We've seen 200 MPs supporting her,
including some at Southampton University, where a lecture theatre of students today became a decent sounding board for many opinions. Where do you think last night's vote leaves Theresa May?
We've got 3 months until the 29th of March, and I think at this point there needs to be some kind of solidarity in getting Brexit through.
She's still left in a situation where she can't get a deal through Parliament, and she's going to have to go back to Brussels with nothing.
She's not listening. She's not taking into account what, those who vote for a hard Brexit want, what those who want a soft Brexit. She's kind of got her deal, and she's driving it forward.
What's Theresa May's future now? Where does she go from here?
I think she's showing a great deal of strength. I mean, we've seen on various sides of the House people are criticising her. She's been nicknamed Theresa the Appeaser, and now she's prepared to go and stand by her deal and go forward in the national interest. And I think her ability to do that and her steadfastness is really to be applauded.
One city, of course, can't speak for a nation, and some...
Theresa May is still your Prime Minister this morning. How do you feel about that?
I couldn't care less. Couldn't care less about any of them.
Well, have other things on their mind, as Britain absorbs last night and anticipates what's to come. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News, Southampton.
Well, the sense here in Westminster is that we will lurch to Christmas, but given the events of the last few days, anything is possible, nothing can be ruled out. Clive, back to you.
OK, Simon, thank you for that. Now, beds in England's hospitals were almost full last week and not far off levels reached at the height of last winter during the flu outbreak. Health editor Hugh Pym is here with me. Hugh, winter officially begins on December the 21st and the beds are already full?
Well, Clive, that is the way it looks right now, even before winter has really begun to bite and really cold weather has come along. Before there's any significant flu problem, these figures show the NHS in England under serious pressure. So let's take a closer look. They show that last week, first of all, there were 94.2% of beds occupied across hospitals in England. The safe level is said to be 85%, and that 94.2 was very close to the peak reached last winter. Also, for A&E performance in November in England, the percentage of patients seen, treated or assessed within the 4-hour target was 87.6, the lowest since March, and below Scotland, although ahead of Wales and Northern Ireland.
So what are the NHS saying about this?
NHS England are pointing out that they are seeing more patients. There are more and more people coming through the doors, and there are more who are actually being dealt with on the day and who don't need a hospital bed. The government is saying more money's been invested in A&E facilities in hospitals and more in social care to take the pressure off hospitals. But many are saying that this winter will be even tougher than last year, even with all that. And the Royal College of Nursing is arguing that the big problem is staff shortages. Filling vacancies is really difficult, and you can't deal with that just by putting in a bit of money at the very last minute.
OK. Hugh, many thanks. Hugh Pimner. It is 16 minutes past 1, our top story this lunchtime. And after surviving her party's confidence vote, Theresa May is back in Brussels for a crucial summit to win guarantees over the Irish backstop. And still to come, a new BBC documentary assesses the impact on the people of Lockerbie of the notorious terror attack exactly 30 years ago this month.
Coming up on BBC News, they're through to the Champions League last 16, but Jose Mourinho says he expected better from his starting lineup for Manchester United.
Now, it was just before Christmas 30 years ago when a quiet market town in Dumfriesshire became the scene of an horrific terrorist atrocity. Pan Am Flight 103 was blown up mid-air, with debris falling across the town of Lockerbie and changing the lives of local people forever. David Cowan reports now on a new documentary from BBC Scotland.
A Pan-American Boeing 747 airliner flying from London to New York crashed tonight in the Scottish borders.
On the 21st of December 1988, the world learned the name of a town called Lockerbie.
I was aware of something just going past the house, and then there was a whoosh, and suddenly the whole sky turned orange, and there were flames hundreds of feet up into the air.
Blown apart by a bomb at 31,000 feet, Pan Am 103 fell onto the houses and countryside below.
There were debris all over the place. There were actually bodies in the garden.
Wreckage from the aircraft was scattered over a wide area.
All 259 passengers and crew were killed. 11 people died in their homes in Lockerbie.
It was a catastrophe that the plane hit the town at all, but it was miraculous in a number of instances that there weren't more people who had been killed or even seriously injured.
In the days that followed, the emergency services, armed forces and volunteers gathered in the dead from the hills, a gruelling task made worse by the time of year.
My daughter had said to me, come and get Christmas dinner with us. I sat down to have my meal and I had one spoonful of soup and I couldn't take any more. I went through to a dark room. I just lay down.
The most telling image is of the very small coffins for very, very young people. That's bad enough for anybody, but somehow, I don't know why, somehow that's worse.
Lockerbie became a place of pilgrimage for the families of the victims.
For people to come into Lockerbie, they were coming into what they imagined might be hell. And what they found was love and care and gentleness and concern.
Well, my strongest feeling, certainly at the time, was the guilt. I think quite a lot of us felt that these people had died and we were still alive.
270 people murdered, because that's what it was. I don't think many people would like that to go past without recognition. As long as there is a Lockerbie, I think this event should be commemorated in December.
David Cowan reporting there. And viewers in Scotland can see the full documentary, The Lockerbie Legacy. That's at 9 o'clock tonight on BBC One, and then across the UK on iPlayer. Now, local authorities in England will be given the power to raise council taxes by an additional 3% next year. The Communities Secretary, James Brokenshire, made the announcement in the Commons a short time ago. Our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth, is at Westminster for us. Alex, was this expected?
Yeah, well, we've been waiting for this announcement for about a week because it was delayed, and this is the context. For the past 8 years or so, councils have had the amount of money they get from government cut back, and at the same time the demand for their essential services, particularly children's and adult social care, has been increasing. So this announcement was telling councils how much money they're going to get for the next financial year, which starts in April. And the Secretary of State said overall there'd be a 2.8% increase in core funding. Councils will also be able to increase council tax to help cover the costs of services by a maximum of 3%. And 15 council areas will try out a new scheme where they get to keep more business rates to help cover the cost of services too. The Secretary of State, James Brokenshire, said he understood the challenge councils faced. He wanted to make sure they get the resources they need. There is going to be a whole review of the way that councils are funded. But Labour said today's announcement falls short, that it's just shifting the burden from the government onto council taxpayers to cover the cost of their services. And the Local Government Association, which represents councils, said next year is going to be challenging. They were disappointed that the government didn't give councils more of the desperately needed resources, and there would be tough challenges when it comes to next year, with councils deciding what they can afford to provide.
OK, Alex, thank you for that. Alex Forsyth there at Westminster. Now, it's just been announced that police forces are being given additional money by the government to fund changes to pensions. There had been warnings that thousands of jobs were at risk because of changes to the system. Our Home Affairs correspondent June Kelly is with me here. Just fill us in on the background to all this, June.
Well, Clive, setting the scene, recorded crime is up. Officer numbers are down, and the police say they're struggling to do everything that is expected of them. A few months ago, police chiefs were told they'd have to find an extra £165 million to basically cover pension costs from next April. Now, they said this was just a bridge too far. In the past few minutes, the policing minister, Nick Hurd, has announced in the Commons a grant of £153 million to offset the pension shortfall, and general funding is going up by £60 million. And then just following on from what Alex was saying, police and crime commissioners around the country, these are the people who oversee police forces, they're being told that they can raise more money through the council tax. They'll have the option of putting up council tax by £24 a year on a Band D property. And it's reckoned this could bring in about 500 million. But, of course, more affluent parts of the country have more Band D properties than poorer areas. We've already had a reaction from one of the country's biggest forces. The Police and Crime Commissioner for the West Midlands says the settlement represents another real terms cut in funding.
OK, June, thank you. June Kelly there. Now, union leaders are demanding tougher punishments for people who attack ambulances. A BBC investigation has found there were more than 200 attacks on vehicles in the past 3 years, with damage caused by knives, bricks and even wheelie bins. Matt Graveling has the details. His report contains some flashing images.
It's going what at the ambulance now, Eddie?
Slabs. One mindless moment, £3,500 worth of damage. And now he's punching the window and kicking the ambulance.
Yeah, that's well understood, and they could say that they're on route.
This ambulance was forced off the road for 6 days. The man responsible was fined just £50.
That attack in Leicester was one of more than 200 recorded by ambulance trusts across the UK in the last 3 years. Our investigation has found that from broken windows to graffiti and even slashed tyres, these vehicles have been attacked with metal poles, fireworks, knives and bricks. And as the service enters one of its busiest periods of the year, the message remains: take one of these off the road and you're putting lives at risk.
I cleared up from a job where I'd handed over to crew, walked round to the front of my RRV and found that flour, eggs and brown sauce had been squirted and thrown all over the front of the car. There was at least 3 calls that I can remember that I couldn't answer, all category 1, which is our highest grade of call.
West Midlands Ambulance Service recorded the highest number of attacks with 36, including 2 ambulances hit by bricks thrown from the same pass 30 minutes apart. Yorkshire saw 29 incidents, including doors being hit with a baseball bat. And London recorded 26 attacks, one in which a man threw a microwave. In November, the maximum prison term for people assaulting emergency workers doubled from 6 months to a year. However, this does not include the damage of ambulances or the equipment they carry.
Similar penalties for those that vandalise should also apply to those that are assaulting staff. You can repair an ambulance, but it can take a lot longer for staff who suffer the trauma of this to get over what they experience.
The Department of Health and Social Care said NHS organisations do everything they can to protect their own equipment and are working closely with police and the Crown Prosecution Service to see that these individuals are rightly prosecuted. Matt Graveling, BBC News.
From today, people joining the organ donation register are to be asked if they want their religious beliefs to be considered. Research has found that cultural and religious concerns result in a lower proportion of people from black or Asian backgrounds becoming donors. Here's Adina Campbell.
evening celebrating South Asian culture, but also taking centre stage at Leeds Hindu Temple are personal stories about organ donation.
Through my lupus, I had renal failure.
Religion is partly responsible for a shortage of Black and Asian donors, but now the organ donor register will include more information about someone's faith.
By declaring the faith, you are saying that when the time comes, you have the religious leader consultation to allow that family to make that informed decision.
For me, it was a life-changing event, and by the grace of God, you know, I'm here, the kidney's functioning well.
Amjad Ali was diagnosed with double chronic kidney failure at the age of 20. After spending 23 years on dialysis, his nephew ended up being his donor.
There are religious issues and there are cultural factors that come into play. And one of the things that I understood from my own background and knowledge of Islam is that there is this hierarchy in terms of scholarly school of thought, and the fact that most community members rely on either a religious scholar or a local imam to give them that validation that what they're doing within the context of Islam is permissible.
Those waiting for a transplant are more likely to find a match from people with a similar background. But the problem is very few people from Black and Asian communities have signed up to be an organ donor, even though more than a third of people from those groups are waiting for a transplant.
I did a complete scan and it was a great shock to me.
Hearing first-hand experiences can make a big difference. Lavinia Ratish donated one of her kidneys to her husband almost 10 years ago.
Service to mankind is first thing that should come to everybody. So if they are not coming forward, even after hearing people like me, or even after seeing so many people suffer in front of their eyes, it's equivalent to killing someone. That's what I would say.
NHS staff say the inclusion of the new faith declaration on the organ donor register will lead to more informed conversations. Adina Campbell, BBC News.
EastEnders Albert Square has been the centre of much drama over the years, but now there's outrage over the cost of revamping the set. The BBC has been criticised by the National Audit Office for a £27 million overspend and the fact that completion will be 2 years late. Here's our media editor, Amal Rajan.
Oh, stinks in here, doesn't it?
It's been the scene of dramatic revelations, crime, conspiracy, death, shootings, and plenty of joy too. But Albert Square is showing its age.
Well, I'm sorry to barge in like this, Doc, Pauline, but it's old Reg across the road. He looks a bit dodgy.
Built in 1984 and originally designed to last for just 2 years, the set has been found wanting, unable to film in high definition, and prompting concerns around health and safety. Now the BBC has been found wanting in its management of the project. The corporation says that building on a brownfield site is intrinsically difficult and points to procurement delays, lengthy contractual negotiations aimed at securing value for money, and inflation associated with construction. Yet the National Audit Office does find reason to criticise decisions and processes undertaken by the BBC.
And action!
EastEnders is such a vital jewel in the corporation's crown that securing its long-term future was not something the BBC could compromise on. Nevertheless, at a time when parts of the corporation are enduring sharp cost-cutting, this overspend is an embarrassment.